Well, hello again. It's UXWBill, and I'm going to answer some more of your questions. This is part 2 of the Ask UXWBill a Question video. My next question, the question I'm going to lead off this video with, comes from YouTube user TheInsomniacGamer, who asked a whole lot of questions. Let's see here. My question is, since you are so good with computers, do you have a top-of-the-line system yourself? Well, to be perfectly honest, I don't really work on the concept of top-of-the-line computing as much as I do value for money. I like a good second-hand system. Give me a good old Pentium 3 with plenty of RAM in it any day of the week, almost. Now, that said, I do have a couple of more top-of-the-line systems. I would say that the first two are probably the two Dell Dimension 8300s. One of them is, or was, a top-of-the-line system. One of them was certainly built to be, but it just never quite measured up to the standard. The other one is a homebrew system. I was thinking of playing around with Sony Vegas software, and I never did get around to doing this because the motherboard I put in this machine, it's an Asus M2A VM board. I hope I'm pronouncing all that properly. And unfortunately, it turned out that it had bad onboard sound, and I still need to RMA that board to this day. The other top-end system, or high-end system, or however you want to put it, is a system based on a Supermicro P8 SCT motherboard with a Pentium 4 LGA 775 processor clocked at 3.4 gigahertz. That's the box upstairs in the man cave at the Roach Palace, and it is running Linux Mint. So there's one more fairly high-end system that I've got, and that's a Dell Dimension 8300, also an LGA 775 Pentium 4, clocked at 3.4 gigahertz. So that pretty much rounds out my top-of-the-line systems and is a rough idea of their configuration. What do I use those computers for? Well, the one I was going to use for video editing. The Linux box over at the Roach Palace is just kind of a general-purpose computer. And since it's got a server motherboard in it with an Intel Copper River chipset, it's not really that much of a video speed demon. In fact, it doesn't even have a video slot in it. It just has PCI and PCI-X slots in it. But it doesn't really matter. The Copper River chipset's built-in server-grade video is more than good enough for anything I've been doing over there. The one Dell Dimension 8300 has an ATI Radeon, I think it's an X1300 in it, and the other one has an NVIDIA GeForce 6200 in it. And then I don't remember what's in the Dimension 8400. The Asus system is just using its onboard AMD 690 chipset for integrated graphics. I was thinking about a dedicated graphics card, but I've never put one in it, and of course I need to RMA the board first. So the one computer was going to be used for video editing. The three Dells, they're just kind of general purpose computers, and the Linux box over at the Roach Palace is also just kind of a general purpose computer. How did I acquire them? Well, one of them I bought new, two of them I bought the parts for. The other Dimension 8300, I bought that on eBay just to have kind of a cross comparison. And the last one, which is the Dimension 8400, I bought that from someone on the Dell news group on Usenet. So, that hopefully answers a lot of those questions. Do you plan to upgrade them in any way? Well, that's kind of fleeting. I don't really know for sure, at least not right now. I'm not planning any upgrades right now. So let's see. The next user to ask a question was bburris123. The keykeeper mentioned in one of his other videos about trying to start the truck behind the old grain truck. What's the idea with that? Well, if you want to know, you should really ask the keykeeper, but I guess he's decided that we're going to have a bit of a contest. Moving on to the next question. How did my parents meet, and how did they do such a superb job raising me? That's been asked by YouTube user yenomeerf, and I am pleased to report that I know that that's free money spelled backwards, which is really quite clever. Anyway, how did my parents meet? Well, I really don't know the whole story, and I'm not going to talk about the whole story on YouTube, even if I did know it. But my mother is from Northern Illinois, and my father has lived here his whole life. And the two met. My mother was down here teaching in a high school setting. They met up, they got together, they got married, and then four of us boys came along. How did they do such a superb job raising you? Well, I think a lot of it was just the fact that, we knew there were rules. That we knew that there were certain things that, we just didn't do. And, we knew where the boundaries were. I'll talk more about that a little later when I'm answering some other questions. In particular, she told us boys that there were just certain things that, we weren't going to be involved in, and we weren't. I guess you could say to a certain extent that, we were afraid of our mother. Even if we were physically capable of taking her, we were still respectful and mindful of what she had in mind. So, that's my best answer for that question. YouTube user Bluetailvappy asks, what is the oldest computer you still use on a day-to-day basis for any function at all? Well, probably the two oldest machines that are still in pretty active use are an IBM PS2 Model 53 SLC2 and one of my IBM PS2 Model 85 X-Class machines. The 53 SLC2, is kind of a nice computer. I've got it set up such that it's just very handy to sit down and write, because I have done a lot of fictional writing. It's a long story how I got started doing that. It's actually kind of funny. I started out, I was listening to a radio program on Sunday night that I really enjoy, and just one week I decided, could I do some fictional writing? Could I possibly do this and see it through to completion? And before I knew it, I'd written a story. And I've just kind of kept up with it there ever since. The Keykeeper and I both, one of us will write a story and read it to the other one, and then the other one will write a story and read it to the other one. So we've kind of kept that going on for probably, I'd have to say it's probably been at least 6 years now. So those are the oldest computers that I have in use. YouTube user SJSharkWannabe had a good question. How many cars and what makes and models has your family owned in your lifetime? Oh, wow. I'm not even sure where to start with that. In my lifetime, well, let's see. When I was born, my mother bought a 1981 Ford Escort, gasoline-fired with a 5-speed manual transmission, an AM radio, an air conditioner, and not a whole lot else. My dad already had a 1970-something Chevrolet Custom Deluxe 10 pickup truck. That was his four-wheel drive truck. And, of course, he had the Cadillac. That truck, by the time he finally got rid of that in the mid-90s, that thing still ran like a champ. Of course it did. It was a Chevy. But it was so rusty. It was so rusty. It had these speakers that he had installed as part of a cassette deck in the kick panels. And the only thing that was really holding the kick panels together anymore was the speakers. But he still sold that thing for a pretty handsome sum because it ran well and it drove okay. I really kind of doubt it's still on the road. My mother sold the Escort in the mid-90s when we got the Taurus wagon. That's the blue Taurus wagon that you might have seen in some of our farm videos. We have the Black Plague van, the 1990 Honda, the 76 MGB, 3 Buicks, 2 88s, and an 89, my pickup truck, the 94 Chevy, and the Volvo, and I think that's about it. I think that pretty much brings us up to current with all the vehicles that we have had in the time that I have personally been alive. Well, I did forget one. There is the 84 GMC Sierra, which was acquired at some repossession sale somewhere and didn't even run when my dad and my grandfather bought it. So, I think that should pretty well answer that question. Oh, I'm probably going to mispronounce this next username, and I'm sorry if I do. YouTube user kbhasikevin asks, have you ever built an embedded system? Well, no, not in the truest sense of actually developing something and using an embedded style processor and a special embedded computing board. But I have repurposed a couple of personal computers as embedded devices, my mono-wall device, a couple of the FreeNAS units that I've got kicking around, and stuff like that. Hopefully that's a good enough answer to that question, because that's about as close to an embedded system as I've ever come. YouTube user walkingfreak asks, do you know anything about professional audio or car audio yourself, such as infinite baffle sound systems for home theaters or cars? My experience with pro audio is pretty limited. In fact, one of the few experiences I've ever had operating professional grade audio equipment was running the soundboard for the drama club when I was in high school. And one of the things I learned there is that you do not take a soundboard. This thing was kind of old and temperamental. It had a built-in power amplifier. It was an Audio Centron brand unit. I don't even know who they are, or if they're still around, or if they were any good. But this thing had character. And occasionally I would get rather put out with some of the character that it exhibited. And one day I had the reverb open on it, and it had a spring-style mechanical reverb in it. And I learned that you do not pick up a mixing desk that has a mechanical reverb that is enabled and let it go crashing back onto the table. It sounded like dropping a load of bricks into a cathedral. It scared the daylights out of me when I did that. And then, of course, I was like, hey, that was cool. Maybe I should do it again. But other than that, my experience with professional audio has been very limited. Likewise with car audio, you know, I've worked on a couple of GM in-dash cassette and radio players. I've also installed a radio in my truck, but no, I don't have anything great in terms of experience there.